In space there are no coincidences. Only patterns we haven't yet understood. First came 3I/Atlas, a mysterious interstellar traveler defying the laws of motion. Scientists were still trying to understand its strange path when another object appeared, one that shouldn't exist, moving in sync as if called by the first. It's not just heading our way, it's positioning itself between Atlas and Earth. Two visitors. One perfect alignment. Coincidence? Or contact? Stay till the end, because what's happening out there might be the closest thing to a message the universe has ever sent. When astronomers first noticed the faint, moving blur on their telescopes in early November 2025, no one thought much of it. Space is full of background noise, asteroids, comets, reflections from satellites. But this one felt different. It didn't move like the others. It had purpose. At first, it was labeled as another comet, an icy wanderer passing briefly through our neighborhood before heading back to the void. Yet as the days passed, more observatories joined in. And what they found would leave the scientific community stunned. The object was catalogued as C/2025 V1 Borisov, discovered by the same Crimean astronomer who years earlier had found 2I/Borisov, the second confirmed interstellar object ever recorded. For a moment, people thought it was poetic, the same man spotting another traveler from the stars. But the odds of that happening twice in a single lifetime are almost impossible. And what came next would make those odds feel even smaller. As the orbit calculations came in, astronomers realized Borisov wasn't following a random path. It was entering our solar system from a direction eerily close to that of another interstellar visitor, 3I/Atlas, the mysterious object that had been baffling scientists for months. But this wasn't just a coincidence of direction. The two objects, arriving from different points in space, seemed to align, like beads on a string tracing a perfect line between Jupiter, 3I/Atlas, Borisov, and Earth itself. When news of the discovery reached NASA's Minor Planet Center, they double-checked the math. Then they checked it again. Everything lined up. By all accounts, Borisov had placed itself in a position directly between 3I/Atlas and Earth, a configuration so precise that some scientists refused to believe it was natural. Even tiny gravitational nudges from Jupiter or the Sun should have made such an arrangement impossible. Yet here it was, forming a triangle in space so geometrically perfect it looked deliberate. The timing made things even stranger. 3I/Atlas had recently shifted course, heading toward Jupiter in what some described as a targeted maneuver. Now, out of nowhere, Borisov appeared, positioned in a way that seemed to monitor or shield the path between Earth and Atlas. It was as if the universe had sent a second player into the field, quietly joining the first. The initial excitement in the astronomy community quickly gave way to unease. On social media, enthusiasts began calling Borisov the Watcher. Some claimed it was here to observe whatever 3I/Atlas was doing. Others believed it was acting as a warning, a cosmic messenger sent ahead of something bigger. The truth was that no one knew. But the data didn't lie. Two interstellar visitors back-to-back, perfectly aligned with our world. At major observatories in Chile, Hawaii, and the Canary Islands, scientists worked around the clock to study the newcomer. Borisov's composition, based on early spectroscopy, looked typical for a comet: ice, dust, trace elements. But the light curve, the way it reflected sunlight, was unusual. Instead of a natural flicker caused by rotation, Borisov's brightness pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. It was faint but consistent, repeating every few hours. That rhythm sent a chill through even the most skeptical researchers. It was too regular, too measured. Some dismissed it as a coincidence of shadow and spin. Others weren't so sure. Patterns like that had been seen before, not in comets but in communication signals. Meanwhile, 3I/Atlas was still behaving in ways that defied explanation. Its jets of gas were reversing direction. Its brightness spiked unpredictably. And now, with Borisov entering the picture, the situation felt more like choreography than chaos. The two objects seemed to know of each other's presence, or worse, to be responding to one another. As the days passed, astronomers began running simulations. They wanted to see what would happen if both trajectories continued unchanged. The results were stunning. In March 2026, 3I/Atlas would pass near Jupiter, a moment many feared could unleash unknown consequences. And just weeks later, Borisov would pass through the same region of space, tracing the exact line Atlas had carved through the solar system. That pattern, one object followed by another, perfectly aligned and spaced, looked less like random motion and more like a signal path. As if something beyond human understanding was sending a message through the planets themselves. NASA, ESA, and the Chinese National Space Agency all issued brief, cautious statements. They confirmed Borisov's interstellar origin and emphasized that no danger to Earth existed. But behind the scenes, data access grew tighter. Some observatories were suddenly told to delay public release of new imagery. Even amateur astronomers reported that their live telescope feeds had begun to drop out whenever tracking 3I/Atlas or Borisov. It was a strange silence, the same kind that had surrounded 3I/Atlas months before. On forums and independent science channels, people began connecting the dots. They noticed how both objects entered our system on nearly parallel vectors. How Borisov's light pulse matched faint electromagnetic disturbances previously attributed to Atlas. And how, when you plotted their paths together, they created a near-perfect triangle anchored by Earth. To believers in cosmic design, that shape wasn't random, it was a signature. Others tried to calm the growing hysteria. Space, they reminded everyone, is full of coincidences that look meaningful only because our minds crave patterns. Maybe this was just that, two unrelated wanderers happening to line up for a while before drifting apart forever. But deep down, even the calmest voices knew how rare that would be. The last time humanity saw an interstellar visitor was years ago, and now two had appeared in the same era, aligned with precision that defied probability. As December 2025 approached, one thing was clear: Borisov was no ordinary comet. And its sudden appearance wasn't just coincidence. It was the beginning of something bigger. Something that would soon pull scientists, governments, and dreamers alike into the same chilling question. What are these visitors really doing here, and what happens when they finally reach us? For weeks, astronomers across the globe stared at their monitors in disbelief. The data kept confirming what no one wanted to believe. C/2025 V1 Borisov wasn't drifting aimlessly through space like a normal comet. It was part of something larger. Something structured. At first, the alignment seemed like a fluke, a trick of orbital mechanics. But when observatories from Chile to Hawaii compared their readings, the numbers lined up perfectly. 3I/Atlas, the interstellar object that had been puzzling scientists for months, was now mirrored by Borisov in a precise, synchronized formation, both tracing a straight, invisible corridor through the solar system. That line pointed directly at Earth. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory quietly released an updated orbital chart showing both paths converging near our planet's orbital plane. To the untrained eye, it looked harmless, two faint blue lines passing by. But for astrophysicists, it was an anomaly wrapped in geometry. Nature doesn't do straight lines. Especially not across interstellar distances. As simulation models ran overnight, a strange pattern began to emerge. Every 12 days, both Atlas and Borisov adjusted their velocity ever so slightly, subtle enough to escape detection unless you looked closely. The timing was exact. Perfect synchronization. It was as if both were following a silent metronome. The phenomenon became known as the twin rhythm, a term whispered across astronomy circles, though few dared to discuss it publicly. When reporters asked NASA for comment, officials brushed it off as coincidental orbital behavior, the result of solar radiation pressure or minor outgassing events. But behind the scenes, leaked internal emails told a different story. Some teams believed these changes were controlled, micro-adjustments that defied known physics for comets or debris. If this was true, it meant something, or someone, was orchestrating it. By mid-November, the two objects had positioned themselves in a perfect three-point alignment. Earth at one end, Borisov in the middle, and Atlas beyond. The distances between them were proportional, forming what mathematicians called a harmonic ratio, a geometric balance rarely seen in natural space trajectories. The eerie precision triggered theories across the internet. Some believed the alignment was a signal chain, transmitting data across the solar system using reflected energy. Others claimed it resembled an ancient triangular constellation, a cosmic symbol meant to draw human attention. And it worked. The public fascination exploded. Space forums filled with high-resolution imagery, 3D orbit models, and wild speculation. Hashtags like #TheAlignment and #AtlasSignal began trending. Even mainstream networks ran special segments featuring interviews with scientists, though most refused to say what everyone was thinking out loud, that this looked designed. Meanwhile, observatories started noticing a strange phenomenon between the two objects. A thin band of charged particles, invisible to the naked eye but detectable on ultraviolet and radio instruments. It stretched faintly between ATLAS and Borisov, like a thread connecting them. Some described it as a plasma bridge. Others called it a communication tether. NASA's Deep Space Network detected subtle bursts of radio energy coming from the region. Not constant signals, but rhythmic pulses that matched the 12-day synchronization window. Coincidence? Possibly. But as one researcher put it, if this is random, it's the most organized randomness we've ever seen. Governments began paying attention. The Pentagon classified certain orbital data under temporary review. The European Space Agency restricted public telescope access to ATLAS-related coordinates. Even the Chinese National Observatory reported technical difficulties when trying to track Borisov's brightness variations. It was as if the world's most powerful institutions had suddenly agreed to stop looking. But independent astronomers didn't. In the quiet hours of the night, backyard telescope operators continued capturing data. Some posted their raw feeds online before they mysteriously disappeared. One amateur astronomer in Arizona reported that his equipment detected a faint electromagnetic echo, as though something between the two objects was reflecting or amplifying radio waves coming from Earth itself. When he published the data, his website went offline within 48 hours. By late November, Borisov's pulsing light pattern, once thought to be a rotation effect, began to shift. The rhythm changed, becoming slower, deeper, more deliberate. Some said it matched the natural frequency of Earth's magnetic field. Others believed it was responding to our planet directly. A growing number of scientists began to suspect that the alignment wasn't just spatial, it was communicative. Two interstellar travelers, deliberately positioning themselves to form a direct line to Earth. But why? One theory emerged from a team at MIT's Haystack Observatory. They proposed that ATLAS and Borisov might be transmitters, using their own ionized tails to generate a long-distance resonance. A signal traveling not through radio waves, but through magnetohydrodynamic plasma, effectively turning the space between them into a living antenna. The idea was dismissed as science fiction, but even skeptics couldn't explain away the data. Each time solar wind pressure increased, both objects compensated perfectly, maintaining alignment like dancers adjusting to the rhythm of a cosmic song. And as December drew closer, the pattern grew stronger. Every major observatory across the world noticed the same thing. Both objects were subtly rotating their axes toward the same focal point, Earth's North Pole. Not the Sun, not Jupiter, Earth. That was the moment when the alignment stopped being a coincidence and started feeling like a message. Social media exploded with theories. Some said it was an interstellar warning, others believed it was a contact protocol, and a few whispered that these weren't comets at all, but machines disguised as natural bodies, waiting for humanity to finally notice. Whatever the truth was, one thing became undeniable. The universe had arranged its pieces with precision too exact to ignore. And somewhere beyond the veil of cold space, something, or someone, had drawn a line straight to us. 4 weeks after the alignment, silence ruled the skies. No strange movements. No new data. Just two faint, glowing points drifting against the endless dark. Then, on December 11, 2025, the silence broke. Deep within NASA's Deep Space Network, one of the 70-meter dishes in Goldstone, California, began detecting a faint pattern buried inside the background noise. At first, engineers thought it was interference, maybe crosstalk from nearby satellites. But as they filtered out the frequencies, something impossible remained. A repeating signal, steady and deliberate, pulsing every 43 minutes and 12 seconds. And it was coming from the narrow corridor of space between 3I/Atlas and C/2025 V1, Borisov. The waveform didn't behave like radio chatter. It didn't match known astrophysical sources like pulsars or cosmic rays. Instead, it carried what researchers described as information density, subtle phase shifts too intentional to be natural. Within 24 hours, NASA quietly issued a blackout on the Goldstone data stream. But it was too late. Amateur radio astronomers in Spain and Chile had already recorded fragments of the same transmission. They posted the raw audio online. The moment you listened, you could feel it. The sound wasn't random. It was structured. The community began calling it the whisper. On spectrograms, the waveform showed strange geometric shapes, repeating hexagons and curved spirals, rotating in mathematical precision. Some claimed they represented orbital coordinates. Others saw binary sequences. But there was one unsettling detail. After every 43-minute cycle, the signal briefly echoed, as if it were bouncing back from Earth itself. Astrophysicists were split. Some argued the echo was a reflection off the magnetosphere. Others believed it meant the transmission was interactive, a two-way signal. That theory took root fast. Within a week, spectrographic analysis showed that the return echoes weren't perfect copies. They contained small differences, subtle modulations matching Earth's own electromagnetic fingerprint, the Schumann resonance. It was as if whatever was sending the original signal had recognized our planet's frequency and was tuning itself to communicate. By mid-December, the signals intensified. Now, instead of 43 minutes, the pulse rate began to shorten. 42 minutes, 41, 39. The rhythm was accelerating, converging toward something. NASA stayed silent. But an internal memo leaked from the Jet Propulsion Lab described the phenomenon as a coherent non-terrestrial signal of interplanetary origin. That single sentence, 6 words, sent shockwaves through the global science community. Publicly, they denied everything. Privately, they couldn't explain it. Meanwhile, a small group of independent researchers formed what they called the ATLAS Network, a collaboration between scientists, radio enthusiasts, and mathematicians trying to decode the whisper. They compared the signal's frequency shifts against orbital data from ATLAS and Borisov. What they found changed everything. Every modulation in the signal matched, to the second, the motion of the two objects as they adjusted their trajectories. The signal wasn't about them. It was from them. Then came the breakthrough. A researcher in Finland named Dr. Una Lehtinen discovered that when you slowed the signal's waveform to 1/16 speed, it produced audible harmonics, tones that rose and fell in precise musical intervals. And when plotted on a visual grid, those intervals formed an image, a spiral inside a triangle pointing downward, toward Earth. It was the same harmonic ratio that defined their orbital alignment. The same geometry repeated, now hidden inside the sound itself. What at first looked like static had turned into something hauntingly intelligent, a message encoded in frequency. But the real shock came days later. On December 22nd, as the winter solstice began, the signal structure shifted again. For the first time, the two sources, ATLAS and Borisov, started broadcasting out of sync. One transmitted, then the other replied. A conversation. Whatever was happening out there wasn't random anymore. It was interactive. When NASA's hidden tracking systems picked up the delay between transmissions, they realized something extraordinary. The time gap matched the exact distance between the two objects. The signal wasn't passing through them, it was bouncing between them. Like a pair of mirrors exchanging light across the solar system. That night, an anonymous data analyst leaked a cryptic comment on an astronomy forum. "They're not sending a message to us. They're sending it through us." The post vanished minutes later. Around the same time, multiple observatories began reporting localized magnetic fluctuations, slight, rhythmic distortions in Earth's magnetic field that pulsed at the same 39-minute frequency. Compass readings jittered. Shortwave radio bands flickered with ghost signals. It was as if the planet itself had become a resonator. Then, at precisely 3:11 a.m. Universal Time Coordinated on December 25th, Everything went silent again. No pulses. No echoes. The whisper was gone. Scientists expected the background noise to return to normal. It didn't. Instead, radio receivers around the world began picking up a faint, persistent hum, not loud but constant, threading through every channel at once. When analyzed, that hum revealed a chilling truth. It was the same base frequency as Earth's magnetic field, only inverted like a reflection. Something had copied our planetary signature. Was it mimicry? A handshake protocol? Or something else entirely? No one could say for sure. But as ATLAS and Borisov continued their synchronized drift toward Earth's orbital path, one thing became undeniable. The universe wasn't just observing anymore. It was answering back. And the real question wasn't what the message said, but who it was meant for. 4 weeks after the alignment, silence ruled the skies. No strange movements. No new data. Just two faint, glowing points drifting against the endless dark. Then, on December 11, 2025, the silence broke. Deep within NASA's Deep Space Network, one of the 70-meter dishes in Goldstone, California, began detecting a faint pattern buried inside the background noise. At first, engineers thought it was interference, maybe crosstalk from nearby satellites. But as they filtered out the frequencies, something impossible remained. A repeating signal, steady and deliberate, pulsing every 43 minutes and 12 seconds. And it was coming from the narrow corridor of space between 3I/Atlas and C/2025 V1, Borisov. The waveform didn't behave like radio chatter. It didn't match known astrophysical sources like pulsars or cosmic rays. Instead, it carried what researchers described as information density, subtle phase shifts too intentional to be natural. Within 24 hours, NASA quietly issued a blackout on the Goldstone data stream. But it was too late. Amateur radio astronomers in Spain and Chile had already recorded fragments of the same transmission. They posted the raw audio online. The moment you listened, you could feel it. The sound wasn't random. It was structured. The community began calling it the whisper. On spectrograms, the waveform showed strange geometric shapes, repeating hexagons and curved spirals, rotating in mathematical precision. Some claimed they represented orbital coordinates. Others saw binary sequences. But there was one unsettling detail. After every 43-minute cycle, the signal briefly echoed, as if it were bouncing back from Earth itself. Astrophysicists were split. Some argued the echo was a reflection off the magnetosphere. Others believed it meant the transmission was interactive, a two-way signal. That theory took root fast. Within a week, spectrographic analysis showed that the return echoes weren't perfect copies. They contained small differences, subtle modulations matching Earth's own electromagnetic fingerprint, the Schumann resonance. It was as if whatever was sending the original signal had recognized our planet's frequency and was tuning itself to communicate. By mid-December, the signals intensified. Now, instead of 43 minutes, the pulse rate began to shorten. 42 minutes, 41, 39. The rhythm was accelerating, converging toward something. NASA stayed silent. But an internal memo leaked from the Jet Propulsion Lab described the phenomenon as a coherent non-terrestrial signal of interplanetary origin. That single sentence, 6 words, sent shockwaves through the global science community. Publicly, they denied everything. Privately, they couldn't explain it. Meanwhile, a small group of independent researchers formed what they called the ATLAS Network, a collaboration between scientists, radio enthusiasts, and mathematicians trying to decode the whisper. They compared the signal's frequency shifts against orbital data from ATLAS and Borisov. What they found changed everything. Every modulation in the signal matched, to the second, the motion of the two objects as they adjusted their trajectories. The signal wasn't about them. It was from them. Then came the breakthrough. A researcher in Finland named Dr. Una Lehtinen discovered that when you slowed the signal's waveform to 1/16 speed, it produced audible harmonics, tones that rose and fell in precise musical intervals. And when plotted on a visual grid, those intervals formed an image, a spiral inside a triangle pointing downward, toward Earth. It was the same harmonic ratio that defined their orbital alignment. The same geometry repeated, now hidden inside the sound itself. What at first looked like static had turned into something hauntingly intelligent, a message encoded in frequency. But the real shock came days later. On December 22nd, as the winter solstice began, the signal structure shifted again. For the first time, the two sources, ATLAS and Borisov, started broadcasting out of sync. One transmitted, then the other replied. A conversation. Whatever was happening out there wasn't random anymore. It was interactive. When NASA's hidden tracking systems picked up the delay between transmissions, they realized something extraordinary. The time gap matched the exact distance between the two objects. The signal wasn't passing through them, it was bouncing between them. Like a pair of mirrors exchanging light across the solar system. That night, an anonymous data analyst leaked a cryptic comment on an astronomy forum. "They're not sending a message to us. They're sending it through us." The post vanished minutes later. Around the same time, multiple observatories began reporting localized magnetic fluctuations. Slight, rhythmic distortions in Earth's magnetic field that pulsed at the same 39-minute frequency. Compass readings jittered. Shortwave radio bands flickered with ghost signals. It was as if the planet itself had become a resonator. Then, at precisely 3:11 a.m. Universal Time Coordinated on December 25th, everything went silent again. No pulses. No echoes. The whisper was gone. Scientists expected the background noise to return to normal. It didn't. Instead, radio receivers around the world began picking up a faint, persistent hum, not loud but constant, threading through every channel at once. When analyzed, that hum revealed a chilling truth. It was the same base frequency as Earth's magnetic field, only inverted like a reflection. Something had copied our planetary signature. Was it mimicry? A handshake protocol? Or something else entirely? No one could say for sure. But as ATLAS and Borisov continued their synchronized drift toward Earth's orbital path, one thing became undeniable. The universe wasn't just observing anymore. It was answering back. And the real question wasn't what the message said, but who it was meant for. After the whisper vanished, a heavy stillness fell over every listening post on Earth. It wasn't silence, not really. It was a wait, like the air before a storm, charged waiting. Scientists who'd been monitoring the faint hum through December began to notice something strange. The planet's own magnetic field, usually calm, predictable, had started to pulse. At first it was subtle. Instruments in Alaska and Norway showed small fluctuations, only a few nanoteslas wide. But within days, those fluctuations spread across continents. The Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat, had shifted. The base frequency was rising, echoing the same inverted tone that had followed the disappearance of the whisper. In Colorado, a small observatory detected it first, faint magnetic ripples sweeping across the ionosphere, each one synchronized with the last known rhythm of ATLAS and Borisov. It was as if the objects out there were playing Earth's field like an instrument. NASA released no statement. The U.S. Geological Survey called it a temporary geomagnetic anomaly, blaming solar activity. But solar telescopes showed no sunspots, no flares, nothing that could explain the patterns. The energy wasn't coming from the sun, it was coming through space. Then came the lights. On January 3, 2026, over the Arctic Circle, pilots reported auroras unlike anything ever recorded. Instead of the usual green ribbons, these lights shimmered in deep violet and electric blue, twisting into spiral shapes that mirrored the symbol Dr. Leighton had decoded from the whisper's harmonic sequence. Some said it looked like a message drawn across the sky. Others said it looked like an eye. Within hours, those same lights appeared over northern Canada, then Siberia, then, impossibly, near the equator. The magnetosphere itself was vibrating. Power grids flickered, compasses spun, and satellites went offline for minutes at a time. In an emergency meeting, scientists from the European Space Agency and NASA compared readings from global magnetometers. What they found was both beautiful and terrifying. The disturbances formed rings, expanding waves centered not on the poles, but on a shifting point somewhere above the Pacific Ocean. A place directly in line with the trajectory of 3I/ATLAS and Borisov. Whatever was happening up there was projecting itself onto Earth's magnetic skin. By mid-January, strange electrical effects began showing up in the atmosphere. Thunderstorms formed in clear skies. Lightning arced across dry deserts without clouds. People started reporting an eerie phenomenon, radios picking up whispers and rhythmic tones even when unplugged. One pilot, flying over the Bering Sea, claimed his cockpit displays suddenly filled with static and a single phrase scrolled across his navigation screen. Echo complete. The event was dismissed as a software glitch. But other pilots began reporting the same thing, always the same words. Always at the same moment, when flying under the auroras shaped like spirals. As the anomalies grew stronger, researchers noticed another connection. The pulses in Earth's magnetic field weren't random, they were responding to fluctuations from Jupiter's magnetosphere. Somehow, the storm giant was resonating with Earth, as if connected through a massive, invisible bridge. And at the center of that bridge were ATLAS and Borisov, the two rogue objects now traveling in eerie synchrony. Dr. Leighton called it the magnetic mirror effect. She believed that the two interstellar visitors were acting as amplifiers, bouncing energy between planetary fields, and that Earth had become part of their circuit. It's like a feedback loop, she said in a leaked interview. But loops don't form unless they're meant to close. That comment vanished from the public transcript. By late January, civilian scientists around the world began running their own models. They found that if the energy increase continued at its current rate, by March the planet's magnetosphere would reach a critical threshold, strong enough to disrupt not just satellites, but time synchronization systems and deep space communications. That's when something even stranger happened. On January 28, every seismograph on Earth, from Iceland to Indonesia, registered a faint, simultaneous vibration. Not an earthquake. Not a tremor. Just a single, synchronized pulse traveling through the entire planet. It lasted less than a second. But it matched the 39-minute interval that had once belonged to the whisper. It was as if Earth itself had answered back. The pulse repeated 39 minutes later. Then again. And again. It didn't stop. Scientists were left speechless. The planet was resonating, pulsing in harmony with something in space, as if caught in a call-and-response pattern. News outlets called it the planetary echo. Social media exploded with theories, everything from alien communication to a quantum resonance event. Governments called for calm. NASA said nothing. But in the quiet corridors of the Deep Space Network, engineers noticed one more impossible detail. The pulses weren't evenly spaced anymore. They were drifting closer together like a countdown. One analyst whispered the obvious, the thing no one wanted to say: if the gap reaches zero, what happens then? The next pulse hit 38 minutes later. Outside, the aurora stretched further south, visible now over Los Angeles, New York, and Rome. The world was watching the skies. And in that electric silence, one truth began to take hold. The Earth was no longer just part of the observation. It had become part of the experiment. For a full minute, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sound came without warning, not from the sky, not from a station, not from any known source. A low, steady tone that rolled through radio receivers, seismic monitors, even underwater microphones. It wasn't a broadcast. It was everywhere at once, as if space itself had hummed. Then just as quickly it was gone. At first, governments called it interference from solar wind. But there was a problem with that explanation. The sun had been unusually quiet that week. No flares, no coronal mass ejections, nothing capable of producing a tone so clean, so unified. Scientists who recorded the sound analyzed it immediately. It wasn't random noise, it had structure. The waveform rose and fell in intervals that matched the same 27-minute light pulse recorded from the silent observers. And when they sped the signal up by exactly 27 times, a new pattern appeared, a rhythm, not unlike a heartbeat. Across observatories and university labs, the tone became the focus of quiet obsession. Acoustic specialists called it harmonic stability, a kind of sonic balance that shouldn't exist in a natural phenomenon. It was too perfect, too measured. Dr. Leighton was one of the first to suggest what few dared to say aloud: this sound may not be random. It might be a form of communication. When asked what it was trying to say, she paused before answering, "It's saying, we're listening too." Her comment, though buried in a closed scientific forum, leaked within hours. It spread like wildfire across online communities. Amateur decoders and data scientists began uploading spectral analyses of the sound. Some thought it hid mathematical constants. Others saw it as a countdown. But one discovery stood out. An engineer from Ohio named Marcus Hall noticed that when he overlaid the sound's frequency shifts with the orbital data of 3I/ATLAS, Borisov, and the silent observers, the peaks aligned precisely with their positions over time. It was like the tone itself was tracing their path across the solar system. Each frequency rise matched ATLAS. Each dip matched Borisov. And the deep, repeating hum at the end corresponded to Earth's own orbital frequency. 3 frequencies, 3 paths, 1 connection. When Marcus shared his finding online, the video was removed within 24 hours. The account vanished and mirrors of the clip began disappearing too. But not before thousands had already downloaded it. Within days the theory took on a name, the trisignal hypothesis. It proposed that the tone wasn't a warning, it was synchronization. That 3I/Atlas, Borisov, and the observers weren't acting independently at all, but in unison. The sound, they argued, was a calibration event, a way to align all 3 objects for a specific purpose. At first, that idea sounded like science fiction. But then came something no one could ignore. In Greenland, a seismic station detected faint tremors exactly 30 seconds before the global tone. The vibrations matched no known tectonic activity. The direction of origin pointed upward, from the upper atmosphere. At the same time, magnetometers in Alaska and Finland recorded synchronized fluctuations. The Earth's magnetic field had briefly pulsed, not outward as it usually does during solar storms but inward. It was as if something external had reached out and touched it. When scientists tried to model the event, the results made no sense. It would take a magnetic surge equal to a small solar flare to create such uniform readings. Yet satellites orbiting the sun reported nothing. And yet the data was real. Across social media, people began sharing videos of lights flickering, compasses spinning, and phones briefly losing GPS lock. None of it lasted longer than 60 seconds. But for those who experienced it, it felt like the Earth had been pinged. NASA's Public Affairs Office released a short statement the next morning. A brief ionospheric disturbance occurred on February 11, likely due to atmospheric interference. No further anomalies detected. But behind that calm tone, something else was happening. A confidential memo later leaked from an internal European Space Agency meeting. It referenced harmonic alignment signatures, consistent with the 3I/Atlas vector path. In simple terms, the signal's frequency shifts matched the timing of Atlas's approach to Jupiter, down to the second. That meant the tone wasn't random. It was predictive. It pointed toward an upcoming event. Dr. Leighton's team cross-referenced the timing of the tone with Jupiter's magnetic resonance models. What they discovered shook them to the core. The next major alignment between Jupiter, Atlas, and Borisov would occur on March 16, 2026. The same date astronomers had already marked as Atlas's closest pass to Jupiter. The tone, they concluded, might have been a synchronization signal preparing for that very moment. For the first time, the idea that something intelligent was behind all of this didn't feel like a conspiracy. It felt like preparation. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers continued to track the observers. They were moving again, slower now, drifting between Atlas and Borisov like satellites repositioning themselves. Their faint blue glow had intensified, flickering in the same rhythmic intervals as the tone's pulse. It was as if they had heard the signal too. In an internal document later leaked from the U.S. Defense Space Command, one paragraph stood out. The signal's harmonic resonance appears to originate from multiple vectors simultaneously, suggesting a distributed transmission network. If correct, this implies coordination between multiple sources across vast distances. Multiple sources. Coordination. Purpose. For the scientists who had spent years dismissing theories of design, this was a moment of quiet reckoning. If 3 interstellar bodies could emit synchronized signals across millions of miles, something was binding them together, something we didn't yet understand. Still, there was one mystery that none of the data could explain. Why now? Why was this alignment, this tone, this pattern appearing in 2026, and not before? That's when an astrophysicist from Tokyo University, Dr. Ryo Shimizu, noticed a pattern hidden in plain sight. When he translated the timing of the tone into binary data, the intervals formed a repeating numerical sequence. 031626. March 16, 2026. The same date again. When asked what he thought it meant, Shimizu simply said, "It's a marker. Something is counting down." And for the first time in human history, the world began to realize, the silence of space wasn't silent at all. When the skies began to pulse with light and the Earth itself seemed to hum an answer, astronomers knew something was happening far beyond ordinary explanation. But no one could agree on what. Some called it interference, others resonance. The truth, however, was waiting out there, invisible, patient, and watching. It started with a transmission from the Subaru telescope in Hawaii. Late one night, an automated sky sweep picked up 3 faint shadows moving in parallel behind Borisov's glowing tail. They weren't comets or debris or camera noise. They were symmetrical, almost too symmetrical. Each one reflected light differently, with edges so sharp that software flagged them as artificial. The operator thought it was a calibration error. But then the same formation appeared again, this time caught by a completely different telescope in Chile. The alignment was perfect. The shapes were real. NASA's Deep Space Network was alerted. Within hours, 3 observatories across the world turned their gaze to the same coordinates. What they found left even the most skeptical scientists in silence. Behind Borisov, faint and small but unmistakable, were 3 identical dark objects. They were flying in a triangle formation, maintaining a constant distance not only from each other, but also from Borisov itself, as if escorting it. The images weren't clear enough to identify their shape. Some analysts thought they looked like irregular asteroids, others said they resembled metallic shards. But there was no question, they were moving with intention. When astronomers projected their paths backward, the data showed something chilling. The formation had entered the solar system months earlier, undetected, hidden in the shadow of 3I/ATLAS. That revelation changed everything. Governments quickly restricted public access to the sky survey data. Independent researchers were warned not to publish findings without review. The official explanation became vague, possible imaging artifacts due to cosmic rays. But people weren't buying it. Amateur astronomers across the world had already downloaded the raw data. They compared exposures, overlaid images, and came to the same conclusion. Something artificial was moving in lockstep with the interstellar visitors. On social media, the group was given a name, the Silent Observers. By early February, the objects had moved closer to Borisov, almost hugging its trajectory. They reflected light from the sun in quick flashes, brief enough to be missed by most telescopes, but rhythmic enough to form a pattern. Every 27 minutes, the light pulsed once. When slowed down and analyzed, the pulse pattern matched the same timing that had once defined the mysterious planetary echo. Coincidence? Maybe. But even coincidences have a limit. Dr. Leighton In, still working unofficially after her NASA contract suspension, managed to obtain the Chilean telescope data through a colleague. What she found left her sleepless for days. The objects weren't just reflecting light, they were bending it. In some frames, stars behind the formation appeared to distort, as if through a gravitational field. That shouldn't have been possible unless the objects had enormous mass or were manipulating light in some way humanity didn't yet understand. She compared her findings to those of a European team monitoring Jupiter's magnetic field. They discovered the same rhythmic distortion pattern within the magnetosphere, a gentle push, pull, and wave. It was as if the objects were talking to Jupiter. When asked what that meant, Leighton In said quietly, "It means they're communicating with the system itself." The phrase spread online like wildfire. Some people believed she meant the magnetic system. Others thought she was hinting at something bigger. That maybe this system wasn't just the planet or its field, but the solar system as a whole. Meanwhile, deep space radar arrays in Australia picked up a faint signal bouncing off the formation. It wasn't natural static. It was a coded reflection, a returning echo of the signal they had sent days earlier to track the objects. But this echo came back different. It carried extra harmonics, subtle shifts that encoded information, as if the signal had been analyzed, modified, and sent back intentionally. The engineers tried to decode it. What they found made no sense. A repeating geometric pattern, 3 overlapping rings intersecting at precise 120-degree angles. A shape that perfectly matched the orbital configuration of Atlas, Borisov, and the Earth as of that very week. It was like the objects were mirroring the solar system itself. As this news leaked, panic started to grow quietly within scientific circles. Not public panic, that would come later, but the uneasy realization that humanity might not be the only one watching. Some began to speculate that these formations could be probes, advanced scouts tracking the behavior of the interstellar objects. Others believed they were part of those objects, fragments or escorts, performing some kind of synchronized function. But there was another theory. A small team from the European Southern Observatory suggested that the objects weren't traveling with Borisov at all, they were guiding it. Their movements predicted slight shifts in Borisov's trajectory, nudging it into alignment not only with Atlas but with Earth's orbital path. In simple terms, something was steering the entire event. By mid-February, a strange quietness settled over all official channels. Data feeds from major telescopes were delayed, updates were censored, and press releases turned generic. Routine observations ongoing. No significant anomalies. But behind the scenes, leaks told a different story. At 3:14 Universal Time Coordinated on February 11th, a classified military satellite captured the clearest image yet. The formation wasn't just 3 objects anymore, there were 5. Each one reflecting faint blue light, positioned in a perfect pentagon. They were no longer behind Borisov. They were ahead of it, and directly between Borisov and Earth. That same night, auroras bloomed again, this time over both hemispheres at once. GPS systems flickered. Power grids surged. For exactly 1 minute, all shortwave radio bands filled with a single tone, deep, resonant, and unmistakably structured. The world didn't know it yet, but the silent observers had just made contact. March 2026 began with silence, the kind of heavy, waiting silence that settles before a storm. The news had quieted, the chatter faded, and even the social networks that once lit up with theories now moved slower, as if everyone sensed something approaching. Every major observatory on Earth was pointed toward the same patch of sky, Jupiter. Atlas was weeks away from its closest pass. Borisov trailed behind it like a ghost ship following the same tide. Between them, the strange cluster known as the silent observers drifted steadily, their bluish glows pulsing faintly in sync. No one could explain how they moved in such perfect coordination without visible propulsion. But by now, explanations mattered less than watching. At NASA's Deep Space Network in California, teams ran simulations 24 hours a day. The math didn't add up. According to orbital models, Atlas should have slowed as it entered Jupiter's gravity well, but it hadn't. Instead, it held steady, defying the very physics that govern celestial mechanics. It was as if it had chosen its path. Across the ocean, in Finland, Dr. Lehtinen stood at her console, staring at the live data stream from the European Southern Observatory. Her team had begun tracking subtle energy fluctuations near Jupiter's magnetic field, faint ripples spreading outward like rings in water. The readings weren't random. They appeared every 27 minutes, the same cycle as the mysterious tone that had echoed across Earth. Every pulse grew stronger. At 3 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated on March 8th, the ripple's amplitude doubled. The magnetic readings shifted color on the display, glowing a deep crimson, a color the team had never seen before in their visual spectrum models. The computers began flagging anomalies faster than they could analyze them. Something was building. Meanwhile, a separate group at JPL confirmed something equally strange. Borisov, the comet that had positioned itself between Atlas and Earth, had adjusted its speed, slightly, but precisely enough to remain in direct alignment with both Atlas and Earth. That meant, from our planet's perspective, Borisov was now a perfect midpoint between us and the interstellar traveler. A straight line, 3 points, Atlas, Borisov, Earth. A cosmic alignment so precise that the odds of it happening naturally were close to zero. Astronomers who believed in coincidence began running out of arguments. By March 10th, more instruments picked up resonance waves, not electromagnetic, not radio but gravitational. Space-time itself was vibrating. These micro-vibrations moved too smoothly to be random. They echoed the same tri-pattern rhythm, Atlas, Borisov, Earth. It was as if something was using gravity as a medium to speak. Governments around the world quietly entered contingency mode. Satellites were repositioned. The U.S. Air Force activated deep space monitoring protocols usually reserved for potential asteroid threats. But this wasn't a threat in any traditional sense. Whatever was happening wasn't aimed to destroy, it was orchestrated. And every pulse was leading toward one date, March 16th. On the night of March 12th, something changed again. The silent observers, those mysterious blue fragments between Atlas and Borisov, began to move. For months they had drifted like debris. Now they were forming a pattern, a circular configuration, each object equally spaced. 6 in total, surrounding Atlas in what looked eerily like an orbital shield. When radio telescopes locked onto them, the instruments picked up the faint return of the same harmonic tone that had once enveloped Earth. But this time it was modulated, carrying within it a pattern that repeated every 60 seconds. When decoded, it displayed a waveform identical to Jupiter's magnetic field line model. It was almost as if the objects were mapping it, preparing it for something. By now, scientists were divided into 2 camps. The first believed the objects were part of a natural but unprecedented gravitational synchronization, a cosmic event that might teach us new laws of physics. The second camp wasn't so sure. They believed the precision of the alignment, the timing, and the communication-like patterns were evidence of intelligence, a mechanism we simply didn't yet understand. Dr. Ryo Shimizu, who had earlier identified the date code within the signal, had been running a new analysis. His latest report suggested that the alignment between ATLAS, Borisov, and Earth would reach perfect geometric symmetry for exactly 91 seconds at 16:03 Universal Time Coordinated on March 16. During those 91 seconds, all three objects would share a direct line through Jupiter's magnetic equator. No one could say what would happen, but they all agreed something would. Then, on March 15, less than 24 hours before the event, strange phenomena began on Earth again. The skies glowed faintly over the poles, even where the auroras shouldn't reach. Compasses twitched southward for minutes at a time. Shortwave radios crackled with faint, rhythmic beeps at exactly 27-minute intervals, echoing the cosmic heartbeat. Civilian astronomers from Chile and South Africa captured a stunning sight. Atlas's tail, once a diffuse stream of gas, had reshaped into a perfect helix, a spiral pattern wrapping around its own axis. The structure was far too symmetrical to be random. It looked constructed. At the same time, Borisov's core began to shimmer, reflecting sunlight with an unnatural brightness. Some described it as if the comet had switched on. And then came the data drop. NASA's magnetometers recorded a massive surge across Jupiter's field, not an outward storm but an inward collapse. The planet's magnetic envelope tightened by a measurable 3%, something scientists had never observed before. The timing matched the exact moment ATLAS entered its magnetic threshold. For the next 3 hours, the signals across all observatories went silent. Instruments flatlined, data streams froze. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And then, just before midnight UTC, the first image came through from the James Webb Space Telescope, a blur of light and motion unlike anything ever captured before. It showed ATLAS surrounded by the 6 observers, Borisov glowing in the distance, and a stream of radiant energy connecting all three. In the heart of that connection, a pulse of light appeared, small but steady. It pulsed once every 27 minutes. The same rhythm. The same message. Some said it looked like communication. Others said it was awakening. Whatever it was, it meant only one thing. The alignment had begun. The moment came not with thunder but with stillness. March 16, 2026. 16:03 Universal Time Coordinated. Across the world, the sky felt heavier, as though gravity itself had deepened by a fraction. At first no one noticed. A few pilots flying over the Atlantic reported their instruments flickering. GPS signals wavered, clocks stuttered, and power grids registered a half-second dip. Then, in observatories from Chile to Hawaii, telescopes caught it, the first flicker from the direction of Jupiter. It wasn't a flare or explosion. It was a rhythm. Every 27 minutes, a pulse of light erupted from the space between Jupiter and the interstellar traveler, ATLAS. Unlike any known radiation or optical signature, it wasn't traveling outward like a burst. It expanded in perfect concentric rings, each one fainter than the last, as though something was scanning or transmitting. Dr. Leitonin's team in Finland was first to detect the pattern embedded inside the pulse. Using a combination of radio and gravitational sensors, they realized it wasn't just light, it was encoded. Each wave carried microfluctuations, precise enough to form structured data. The amplitude wasn't random, it was binary. The pulse was speaking. But no one could yet decode the message. NASA went into blackout mode again. Live streams cut off mid-broadcast, replaced by static screens reading signal interference detected. Amateur astronomers flooded online forums with screenshots, raw data, and frame captures. The scientific community fractured in real time. Some demanded transparency, others claimed the world wasn't ready to hear what was really happening. At 16:30 Universal Time Coordinated, 27 minutes after the first pulse, came the second. This time it hit Earth. Not in a physical sense. No explosion, no shockwave, but in the magnetic field. Satellites across low orbit reported an electromagnetic resonance unlike anything recorded before. It didn't disrupt communication, it synchronized it. Devices across different continents flickered in unison, from security cameras to digital clocks. For exactly 3 seconds, every system seemed to breathe together. Then silence again. At the Deep Space Network in California, Dr. Marquez leaned over his console as the instruments recalibrated. He whispered what the readings suggested: the signal isn't broadcasting. It's responding. Responding to what? No one knew. In the data logs, one sequence stood out, 3 repeating digits. 203. It appeared in every stream, from radio waves to gravitational echoes. Theories spread instantly. Some said it was a coordinate. Others believed it was a countdown. But then came the third pulse. It was stronger, visible even to the naked eye. People across Europe and North America stepped outside to see a faint ripple of light moving across the night sky, like a reflection on water. No one could explain it. No aurora, no atmosphere, just light, shimmering where it shouldn't exist. News outlets scrambled to cover it. The headlines read, "Strange light seen across sky, NASA silent. Is Atlas trying to communicate?" While the public looked up, scientists stared at the numbers. The pattern had changed. The 27-minute interval shifted slightly. Now it was 26 minutes and 57 seconds. The timing had tightened. To most, that meant nothing. But to physicists, it meant one thing: feedback. Something was interacting with the pulse. Something between Jupiter and Earth. At that moment, all eyes turned to Borisov, the second interstellar object now perfectly aligned between the two. High-resolution imaging from Webb and Hubble showed that Borisov's surface was no longer icy white. It was metallic, reflecting Atlas's light with impossible precision. The helix-shaped tail was gone. In its place, a narrow beam of ionized light extended forward, straight toward Earth. It was reflecting the pulse. Not randomly, not accidentally, but as part of the pattern. For the first time, it looked like Atlas wasn't alone in broadcasting. Borisov was amplifying it. Together they formed a network, one node sending, the other relaying. And we were the endpoint. The world stood still again as the fourth pulse arrived. This time, every magnetometer on Earth spiked. Compasses spun wildly. The auroras flared so bright they were visible from Mexico and the Mediterranean. The air hummed with low-frequency vibration, inaudible but heavy, the kind that makes your bones feel alive. And then, amid that vibration came a sound. At first it was subtle, a faint echo transmitted through ground sensors, repeating faintly like a heartbeat. Scientists amplified it 1,000-fold and heard something unmistakable: rhythm, structure, and tone. It wasn't noise. It was intentional. 3 ascending notes. Then a pause. 3 descending notes. Then silence. And then the sequence repeated, every 27 minutes. Dr. Shimizu was the first to say it aloud: "It's calling." By now, everyone knew the pattern had reached Earth. The magnetic resonance synchronized with the Schumann frequency, the natural electromagnetic heartbeat of our planet. Whatever this was, it wasn't random interference. It had adapted to Earth's signal, harmonized with it. Governments issued quiet advisories to major power grids and aviation networks, urging caution but offering no details. Meanwhile, astronomers across the world realized something even stranger. The source of the pulses had moved closer. 3I/Atlas was decelerating. Instead of slingshotting past Jupiter as physics dictated, it was being drawn inward, following a controlled arc, directly toward the gas giant's great red spot. The silent observers maintained formation, surrounding it in a slow spiral. Borisov adjusted position again, perfectly keeping the line between Atlas and Earth. The geometry held. And then, in one last flash, the fifth pulse arrived. This one didn't fade. It expanded, cascading outward until it reached our sensors in one overwhelming burst. 491 seconds, the exact predicted window of symmetry. The magnetic field of Earth resonated in phase with Jupiter's. 2 planets, connected by one invisible thread of energy, separated by 500 million miles yet vibrating as one. It was a bridge. And when the bridge collapsed, everything went quiet again. No more pulses. No more vibrations. Just silence. The alignment broke and Borisov dimmed. Atlas vanished into Jupiter's storm, its signal gone. The 6 observers followed, one by one, until only the planet's swirling clouds remained, red, golden, endless. But hours later, as scientists sifted through the static and fragments of data, they found something extraordinary, a final imprint encoded in the fifth pulse. It wasn't numbers. It wasn't random. It was an image, a spiral. 6 points surrounding one. The same shape the observers had formed around Atlas. And at the center of that spiral, a single dot. Blue. Earth's color. By the time November turned to December, astronomers began noticing something they couldn't easily explain. The 2 interstellar visitors, 3I/Atlas and the newly discovered C/2025 V1 Borisov, were no longer behaving like distant wanderers. Their paths, once thought independent, now seemed to be subtly linked, as if drawn by an invisible thread through the fabric of space. Borisov, the newcomer, wasn't just passing through. It had fallen into a precise, calculated position directly between Atlas and Earth, like a shield or a signal relay, holding its line in quiet defiance of randomness. At first, the astronomical community dismissed it as coincidence. Space is vast beyond comprehension, and chance alignments happen all the time. But this wasn't an ordinary coincidence, it was exact to a degree that nature almost never achieves. When simulations were run, they showed the two trajectories forming a perfect geometric line with Earth at one end, Atlas at the far end, and Borisov exactly in the middle. Not slightly off. Not near the middle. Exactly there. That precision made people nervous. Even for professionals who lived and breathed uncertainty, this was too perfect. As one astrophysicist at Caltech said during a private conference, space doesn't draw straight lines. Not like this. But while the professionals debated, the public was already running wild with speculation. Online forums filled with theories, some grounded in science, others slipping into pure imagination. Was Borisov acting as a decoy? A messenger? A kind of cosmic mirror reflecting data back toward Atlas or Earth? The deeper astronomers looked, the stranger it got. Normally, comets and interstellar objects are influenced only by gravity, sunlight, and outgassing. But Borisov wasn't following any of those predictable patterns. When it should have drifted slightly due to Jupiter's gravity, it didn't. When it should have brightened from the sun's heat, it stayed dim and cold. Its coma, the glowing cloud that surrounds comets, remained faint, almost deliberate, like it was trying to hide itself. That unnatural restraint made some scientists quietly whisper about controlled stability, a term usually reserved for spacecraft, not comets. NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab tried to reanalyze the orbital data to check for sensor errors, but the numbers held. Even when corrected for every possible variable, Borisov stayed locked in its exact position, between Atlas and Earth, as if it was holding formation. Then came the radio readings. Around early December, low-frequency signals began bouncing off the object in rhythmic bursts. They weren't strong enough to be communication, but they were too patterned to be static. The intervals matched a faint pulse already being traced from the direction of Atlas weeks earlier. It was as though Borisov was receiving, and then repeating. The signals echoed across space in nearly perfect time delay, like two beacons talking in a language of silence. NASA publicly dismissed it as solar interference, but a leaked internal memo suggested that scientists at Arecibo had confirmed the correlation. Two sources, two objects, one rhythm. It couldn't be ignored anymore. Meanwhile, the European Southern Observatory pointed its telescopes at Borisov for deeper spectral analysis. What they found raised more eyebrows. The reflected light wasn't consistent with dust, ice, or rock, the usual ingredients of a comet. Instead, there were traces of nickel alloys and something resembling carbon nanotubes, materials that don't naturally form in space. They're manufactured. And yet, no one was ready to say those words out loud. Artificial. That word stayed buried in classified reports, redacted before publication. Then came an even stranger observation. Atlas began slowing slightly as if matching the pace of Borisov. Its velocity drop was tiny, fractions of a percent, but it was measurable. Four objects traveling millions of miles apart, maintaining synchronized movement is nearly impossible without coordination. That's when astronomers at the University of Arizona proposed a daring idea. What if Borisov wasn't an independent object at all but part of a system? Like a smaller craft detached from a larger one, each with a role to play. By mid-December, online theories had spiraled out of control. Some said Borisov was a scout drone, scanning Earth before Atlas arrived. Others believed it was a beacon, guiding Atlas's trajectory toward a safer or more meaningful entry point into the solar system. A few thought it was defensive, protecting Atlas from detection or destruction. Even the wildest theories couldn't be fully dismissed because the data itself defied normal astrophysics. Then, without warning, Borisov flared. Its coma brightened suddenly one evening, releasing a sharp burst of light that was captured by several observatories. The glow lasted only a few minutes, then faded completely. For that brief moment, sensors across multiple continents recorded a spike in electromagnetic activity, strong enough to interfere with satellite communications. Whatever that pulse was, it seemed coordinated. Just one day later, Atlas emitted a similar burst, different wavelength, same timing. That back-to-back flash left experts speechless. If one flare was random, two identical flares separated by precise time intervals meant intent. A few scientists began privately comparing the phenomenon to data transmission handshakes, the kind spacecraft perform when they sync before exchanging information. But again, officially there was silence. Agencies said nothing. Reports stopped being updated. And for the first time since its discovery, live public tracking of Atlas and Borisov went offline. The explanation: maintenance. The internet exploded with theories. Some believed the alignment between ATLAS, Borisov, and Earth was a setup for a signal relay, a method to transmit something vast, across interstellar distance, using gravitational or magnetic fields as conduits. Others feared it was a countdown, a process already in motion. Amateur astronomers kept watching though. Through backyard telescopes and long exposures, they noticed that Borisov's position continued to hold perfectly steady, like a sentry standing guard between humanity and something unknown approaching from the dark. And then, just days before Christmas, new images leaked from an observatory in Chile. They showed a faint tether of ionized particles stretching between the two objects, a filament so thin it almost disappeared in the noise. Scientists dismissed it as cosmic dust, but when enhanced, the filament appeared structured, like a line of repeating nodes connecting the two objects through space. That image went viral within hours. Some saw it as proof of a connection. Others called it the beginning of something far larger than anyone wanted to admit. As the year neared its end, fear turned into quiet awe. No one could say what Borisov truly was, or why it had aligned so perfectly with Atlas and Earth. But in every observatory, every late-night lab, and every restless human mind watching the stars, one question echoed louder than the rest. If these two objects are truly linked, then what are they preparing for? Whatever the answer, it's moving closer every single night. The deeper scientists probed into the strange alignment between 3I/Atlas and C/2025 V1 Borisov, the more unsettling the story became. The data wasn't just coincidental, it was deliberate. Every angle, every interval, every burst of light seemed to fit into a pattern, as if the universe had started whispering in mathematics. But this wasn't a whisper from nature. It felt more like a signature, a message written across millions of miles, one that only the most patient minds could even begin to read. It started with a breakthrough from a small research team in Finland. They'd been tracking the radio pulses emitted from the region where Atlas and Borisov appeared connected. When they compared the timing of both signals, they found a delay that was almost too perfect. 3 minutes and 14 seconds, the value of pi, the infinite number that defines the geometry of circles. That discovery sent chills through the community. It was as if someone, or something, was encoding universal constants into the rhythm of interstellar noise. At first, skeptics claimed it was random. Cosmic signals, after all, are full of coincidences. But then came the next twist. The same delay repeated every 24 hours, synchronized with Earth's own rotational period. Somehow, this interstellar rhythm had locked onto our planet's daily spin, an impossible level of precision unless it was intentional. Suddenly, the conversation in scientific circles shifted from what it was to why. Meanwhile, NASA quietly increased telescope observation time at Mauna Kea and the Very Large Array in New Mexico. Yet despite all the focus, very little was released to the public. The official reports became shorter, more vague. The open data links used by amateur astronomers began showing service interruptions. It felt like a wall had gone up between the sky and the people watching it. And whenever that happens in science, curiosity doesn't fade, it burns hotter. Independent researchers filled the void. One of them was a former SETI analyst named Dr. Caroline Huxley, a quiet, methodical scientist who'd once left the field over frustration with bureaucracy. But when she heard about the Atlas-Borisov alignment, she came back. She built her own listening array out of salvaged radio dishes on her family's property in Arizona. Within days, she started detecting the same pi pattern pulses, but with faint modulations, small variations hidden inside the main signal. She ran those variations through a spectrogram, and what emerged was haunting. The waveforms weren't random noise, they were repeating arcs, almost like glyphs. Each one curved in precise symmetry as though drawn by intention. Caroline hesitated to publish her findings at first. The last thing she wanted was to be labeled a conspiracy theorist. But when she overlaid those arcs against the orbital paths of Atlas and Borisov, something clicked. The waveforms matched the spatial geometry of the two objects' trajectories, the same curve, the same tilt, the same ratio. It was like the signals themselves were a map of their motion, encoded in radio form. The discovery went viral after she quietly leaked it to a private astronomy forum. Within hours, hundreds of amateur astronomers confirmed the same patterns. Suddenly, it wasn't just a theory, it was evidence. The connection between Atlas and Borisov wasn't only physical, it was communicative. Something was linking them, coordinating them, guiding them. As public interest grew, so did government silence. On December 29th, several observatories that had been providing live orbital data went dark simultaneously. The reason given: maintenance and calibration. Yet insiders claimed they'd been ordered to halt external broadcasts by international directive. The phrase alone was strange. International? That meant multiple space agencies were involved. ESA, NASA, Roscosmos, JAXA, all aligning on secrecy at the same time. But you can't stop people from looking up. A private satellite company called Skirich, based in Texas, continued its observations using a small constellation of imaging satellites. What they captured was stunning. Between December 31st and January 3rd, ATLAS released 3 faint trails of material that appeared to stretch directly toward Borisov, not toward the Sun, not along the expected orbit, but toward that exact point in space. The material didn't disperse like gas or dust. It stayed coherent like a filament or a signal beam. When analysts enhanced the footage, they found that the trails pulsed, dim to bright, bright to dim, at the same 3-minute 14-second rhythm first detected in Finland. For those who believed in coincidence, this was where belief stopped. For those who believed in intelligence, this was confirmation. The media began to pick up fragments of the story, but mainstream outlets treated it cautiously. They framed it as a fascinating alignment of comets, or unusual cosmic coincidence. Yet in corners of the internet, independent scientists and hobbyists were already calling it something else: communication. A conversation happening over hundreds of millions of miles, played out through the language of light and geometry. By mid-January, a strange pattern started forming in the sky. The position of the 2 objects, relative to Earth, began to mirror the constellation Gemini, the twins. It was as if the cosmos itself was giving them a name. For many, that was symbolic. 2 visitors, 2 paths, 1 purpose. Some said they were twin probes sent to observe or measure. Others thought they were the same entity, split long ago and now reuniting across time and space. Dr. Huxley proposed a third possibility. If ATLAS and Borisov are connected, she said in a private interview, then maybe we're not witnessing arrival, but activation. That quote spread like wildfire across social media. Activation. The word captured the imagination, and the fear. Because if this was activation, then something was beginning, not ending. Around the same time, Skirich's final dataset revealed a new detail. Both ATLAS and Borisov had begun to rotate in synchronized motion. 2 separate bodies, turning at the same angular speed in the same direction across millions of miles. The odds of that happening naturally? Practically zero. By now, whispers had turned into dread. NASA's internal forecast models suggested that if the alignment continued, both objects would reach their closest points to Earth's orbital path by April 2026, within 3 weeks of each other. The possibility of interaction wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was inevitable. And yet, amid all the data, one haunting question hung in the air. If these 2 objects are communicating, what are they saying? Is Borisov warning ATLAS? Is ATLAS guiding Borisov? Or are they together sending a signal outward, to somewhere else entirely, beyond Jupiter, beyond the edge of human reach? Whatever the truth is, the pattern keeps tightening, the rhythm keeps repeating, and every telescope on Earth is now watching. Somewhere in the silence between those pulses, humanity waits for an answer. Because if these 2 visitors are not just wanderers but instruments of intent, then the question isn't where they came from, it's what they came for. The world didn't notice at first. To most people, the night sky looked the same, stars steady and unchanging, comets too distant to care about. But for those watching closely, something was off. Instruments were catching whispers, faint rhythmic echoes bleeding through deep space frequency bands. They didn't sound like natural noise. They sounded alive. It began in early February 2026, when observatories across the globe started picking up repeating low-frequency pulses. The timing matched the same 3-minute 14-second interval first detected months before, but now it carried something new, a harmonic resonance, a double echo that seemed to come from 2 sources simultaneously. The strange part? The echoes weren't coming from ATLAS or Borisov directly. They were bouncing back, reflecting off something unseen between them and Earth. The discovery set off alarms inside NASA's Deep Space Network. Engineers initially thought it was equipment interference, maybe a satellite signal rebounding through space. But when they triangulated the source, the math didn't add up. The echoes appeared to originate from a fixed point roughly 2.3 million miles ahead of ATLAS's path. A region with no known asteroids, no spacecraft, nothing. A void. Yet something in that void was responding. To test the phenomenon, they fired a narrowband radio signal toward ATLAS. A controlled transmission containing a series of prime numbers, a pattern often used by SETI researchers to test for intelligence. It should have disappeared into the noise of space. Instead, 27 minutes later they got a reply. A faint pulse, same frequency, same rhythm, only reversed. like an echo deliberately mirrored back. That was the moment the silence of space felt suddenly thin, like something was listening on the other side. Behind closed doors, data teams began cross-analyzing the returns. They noticed that every time the signal bounced back, Borisov's brightness flickered slightly, as if it were reacting. Within a few days, patterns began to emerge, geometric arrangements in the timing of the echoes, sequences that mirrored orbital mechanics or gravitational ratios. The data didn't behave like noise. It behaved like thought. For a few weeks, the findings were kept internal. Only a small circle of researchers had access to the raw telemetry. But leaks are inevitable. A whistleblower at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory shared screenshots of the signal patterns on an encrypted forum. Within hours, astrophysicists, programmers, and enthusiasts worldwide began decoding them, or trying to. Some found recurring ratios that matched planetary orbits. Others saw musical structure, a hidden melody buried inside static. A music theorist at Stanford noticed something incredible. When he converted the echo intervals into audible sound, the waveform created a harmony similar to a minor triad, a human-recognizable chord, soft and eerie. "It's like space is humming," he said during an interview. Not randomly. Purposefully. Soon, online communities started calling it the Song of Atlas. The name stuck. By mid-February, the story had gone viral. Podcasts, news anchors, and conspiracy channels all ran with it, each spinning their own version. Some said the echoes were proof of alien communication. Others claimed it was Earth's own reflection, a strange electromagnetic mirror caused by Jupiter's massive magnetosphere. But through all the noise, one truth remained. The data was real, the timing consistent, and the origin unknown. Meanwhile, NASA's silence grew louder. They stopped publishing raw signal logs entirely. The SETI Institute issued a bland statement calling the findings inconclusive, and several astronomers who'd been openly discussing the phenomenon suddenly stopped commenting altogether. Their social media accounts went quiet, their research pages wiped clean. But science, like light, finds a way to break through. Dr. Caroline Huxley, the same independent researcher who had first identified the pi pattern months earlier, resurfaced with a new claim. Using her homemade radio array, she'd been monitoring the same frequencies independently. What she found wasn't just repetition, it was escalation. The echoes were changing. The 3-minute 14-second rhythm was starting to compress, speeding up by microseconds every few days as if building toward a threshold. And there was one more disturbing detail. Every acceleration matched the orbital shifts of Atlas itself. As the comet picked up speed approaching Jupiter's gravitational influence, the signals followed suit. Almost like they were linked, a living system adapting together. She shared her findings with an underground network of data scientists, and the results were undeniable. When they mapped the echo strength over time, the curve wasn't random. It formed a spiral. The same spiral that describes galaxies, hurricanes, and DNA. Nature's universal signature, encoded into radio static. The idea that two interstellar objects could be broadcasting something so deliberate shook even the skeptics. Still, the scientific community held the line publicly: coincidence, misinterpretation, pattern-seeking bias. But behind the curtain, government agencies were mobilizing. Multiple countries, the US, China, and even the European Space Agency, redirected high-power radar satellites toward the region. The data, however, was classified before it reached the public domain. Around this time, amateur astronomers began reporting visual anomalies too. Short bursts of bluish light flashing around Atlas's tail, like small electrical discharges. They lasted only seconds but appeared to align with the timing of the radio echoes. Photos surfaced online, grainy but compelling. Whatever was happening, it was no longer just theoretical. It was visible. By late February, tension was building in scientific circles. The echoes were getting stronger, measurable even by smaller observatories now. And then, as if scripted by the universe itself, something extraordinary happened. Borisov, the shielding object positioned between Atlas and Earth, flared suddenly, 10 times brighter than usual, and then went dark for 43 seconds. When it reappeared, its trajectory had shifted, slightly but unmistakably. The data suggested an exchange, a transfer of energy or maybe of information. It was as though Borisov had received something, or given something away. Dr. Huxley and her team compared the timing of that flare with the latest echo burst. It matched to the second. Two comets, light years apart in origin, now acting as synchronized beacons across the void. The evidence of connection was no longer theoretical. It was playing out in real time. And while no one could explain what was driving it, one thing had become clear: The echoes weren't fading. They were multiplying. The number of simultaneous returns detected each night had tripled in less than a week. Something vast was awakening in the data, like a pattern too big to see all at once. It wasn't just a cosmic coincidence anymore. It was choreography, two rogue travelers locked in rhythm, and the universe had started to hum along. Somewhere between them and us, a message was building, one that might not be meant for Earth alone. By the morning of March 7, 2026, the pattern could no longer be ignored. Every deep space observatory that had access to unfiltered data began whispering the same phrase, "There's a third one." It started with a faint anomaly, a soft distortion appearing between the two major signal sources, 3I/Atlas near Jupiter, and Borisov moving steadily toward the inner solar system. Somewhere between them, a smaller echo had emerged. Weak, almost transparent, yet undeniably real. At first, scientists thought it was a reflection, a harmless radio bounce between Jupiter's massive magnetic field and Borisov's dusty coma. But the data told another story. The echo didn't behave like a reflection. It had depth. It moved independently. Its timing shifted in perfect harmony with the other two objects, as if responding, not reacting. Dr. Caroline Huxley was one of the first to call it out publicly. In a brief encrypted post shared through the Astronet network, she wrote, "We are now detecting a tertiary resonance in the alignment vector. It's deliberate. It's structured. It's intelligent." The post was quickly deleted. But screenshots spread faster than any government filter could contain. Within hours, the idea of a third object became the new obsession for both professionals and amateurs alike. Astronomers from Chile to Hawaii began re-aiming their scopes at the coordinates she hinted at, roughly 200 million miles from Earth, near the outer edge of the asteroid belt. And there, faint but visible, they found it. A small, reflective point of light that didn't match any known cataloged body. It wasn't a natural orbit. It was drifting against the gravitational flow, maintaining a straight, unwavering path directly between Atlas and Borisov, like the perfect geometric center of a cosmic triangle. They named it Object X. NASA didn't acknowledge its existence. But the European Space Agency quietly issued an internal update labeling it as UO49, or Unidentified Object, Class 49. The number wasn't random, it referred to its energy signature. Object X emitted low-frequency radio pulses peaking at 4.9 MHz, the exact harmonic that completed the interference resonance first detected 2 weeks earlier. It was now clear, the interference wasn't just from two sources. It was a triangulated transmission. When plotted on a 3D model, Atlas, Borisov, and Object X formed a precise alignment aimed directly at Earth's orbital plane. The geometry was so perfect that even minor gravitational perturbations didn't seem to affect it. The three objects adjusted subtly, as if coordinated, maintaining the line. To many scientists, this was beyond coincidence. In physics, nature loves chaos. Perfect order, especially across millions of miles, demands explanation. And in this case, the explanation was growing more unbelievable by the hour. Dr. Huxley, now operating from a remote observatory in northern Canada, began assembling a small group of independent researchers, codenamed the Triad Project. Their mission was simple: to analyze the resonance pattern being created by the three objects. Using open-source signal data, they mapped the energy field in real time, and what they saw left them speechless. The overlapping signals weren't just waves. They formed patterns that repeated in harmonic ratios identical to human speech frequencies. Not sounds, not words, but structure. It was as if something was speaking in physics itself. When slowed down and converted to audio, the resulting tone was haunting. A slow, rising hum that pulsed like a heartbeat, layered with faint oscillations that almost resembled breath. Listeners described it as eerie, emotional, even mournful. It wasn't random static. It felt alive. Meanwhile, Object X grew brighter. Each night, its reflectivity increased slightly, as if it were adjusting its surface to capture and redirect more light. The brightness curve didn't match any known material. It pulsed in sync with the combined frequency field. Some claimed it was a power source. Others believed it was an amplifier, a relay between Atlas, Borisov, and something else we couldn't yet see. Then came the most shocking discovery of all. An AI-based sky survey system in New Mexico picked up infrared emissions coming from Object X. These emissions weren't uniform. They formed geometric pulses, creating a lattice-like pattern in space, symmetrical, repeating every 47 minutes. 47. Again. The same number that had haunted scientists since the Psyche probe's final data burst. The same sequence hidden in Atlas's early telemetry. the number that refused to disappear. At that moment, Dr. Huxley realized something chilling. The objects weren't just traveling together. They were synchronized. When Atlas accelerated near Jupiter, Borisov adjusted speed to maintain position. When Borisov shifted slightly off-axis, Object X corrected its alignment. No known natural forces could create this level of coordination. It was either the greatest coincidence in cosmic history, or a demonstration of control on a scale humanity had never witnessed. News of the discovery leaked in fragments, grainy telescope images, anonymous scientist emails, mysterious shortwave broadcasts repeating coded numbers. The public grew restless. Some dismissed it as internet conspiracy, others as the dawn of disclosure. But deep in classified communication threads, government agencies were running silent simulations. The scenario files were labeled multi-origin event. The conclusions were redacted. By March 10, all three objects had aligned perfectly, their combined magnetic influence brushing Earth's outer field for the first time. Satellites began experiencing unexplained resets. Subtle voltage spikes were recorded across undersea cables. A deep rumble of electromagnetic pressure hummed through the atmosphere. Object X was no longer faint. It was now visible to mid-range telescopes. And if you knew exactly where to look, you could see it as a tiny moving star, steady, deliberate, and impossibly precise. What was it doing there? Was it observing, assisting, or controlling the others? Dr. Huxley believed it was the key, the synchronizer that made the entire event possible. Without it, Atlas and Borisov would simply pass by. With it, the system became coherent, focused, alive. Whatever these objects were, they were no longer behaving like comets or asteroids. They were behaving like a network. And as the clock ticked toward March 16, the energy between them began to build, like the deep breath before something unimaginable. Something the whole world was about to witness. By the night of March 11, 2026, the hum was no longer a whisper, it had become a rhythm. Across observatories, radio telescopes, and even amateur listening posts, a subtle, repeating tone began to drift through the static of space. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was intentional. At first, no one wanted to call it a signal. In science, that word carries too much weight. A signal means intelligence. It means intent. It means someone, or something, is on the other end. But as the data poured in, denial started to crumble. The tone came in short, measured bursts, 3 low pulses, 1 high, then silence. Over and over. It wasn't random. It wasn't noise. And it matched perfectly with the alignment pattern of 3I/Atlas, Borisov, and Object X. When plotted, each pulse coincided with the object's synchronized movements, like cosmic clockwork ticking in the dark. By the following morning, the phenomenon had a name: the hidden transmission. Governments tried to contain the information, but it was too late. Independent researchers were already decoding parts of the pattern using open-source tools. The strange rhythm wasn't language in the traditional sense. But when converted into frequency ratios, the sequence produced a complex waveform that resembled structured code, one that repeated across multiple harmonic layers. It was as if 3 different transmitters were speaking the same message in 3 separate octaves. At MIT, a small team led by astrophysicist Dr. Elena Rowe made the first breakthrough. Using a deep neural translation model originally built to identify pulsar emissions, her algorithm found recurring sequences, intervals that repeated with the precision of engineered communication. Her report began simply. The alignment of 3I/Atlas, Borisov, and Object X is generating data. This is not a coincidence. The paper never reached publication. Within hours, it was classified by U.S. Space Command. But fragments of the findings leaked, enough to fuel global speculation. For the first time, humanity wasn't just looking at the cosmos. It felt like the cosmos was looking back. Then something even stranger happened. Radio observatories on Earth began to detect a faint reflection, an echo of the same transmission bouncing off the upper atmosphere. The signal wasn't coming only from space. It was interacting with Earth's magnetic field. And for a brief moment on March 12, every major communication satellite registered the same anomalous blip, a simultaneous frequency spike at 4.9 MHz, the same signature linked to Object X. Phones glitched. GPS systems flickered. Long-range navigation radios lost calibration. It lasted less than 90 seconds, but it was enough to trigger panic in several government monitoring centers. By dawn, people across the planet were sharing strange audio clips online. Deep, oscillating hums recorded by amateur radio operators. The sounds varied slightly depending on location, but the pulse pattern was identical. 3 low, 1 high. Pause. Repeat. And then came the images. On March 13th, a solar monitoring satellite, part of ESA's Solar Orbiter project, accidentally captured something in its peripheral lens. For just 2 frames, a streak of light crossed between Jupiter and Borisov. But when analysts enhanced the data, the streak wasn't just light, it was structured. It had edges. Rectangular. Metallic. It was gone the next frame as if it had cloaked itself back into invisibility. Theories exploded. Some said it was debris. Others whispered about probes, drones, or autonomous beacons sent ahead of the main body. Whatever it was, the light reflection matched the energy frequency of Object X's signature. And with that, a terrifying idea began to form. What if these weren't just comets, but components? Pieces of something larger, coordinating through resonance, like instruments in a symphony too vast for human ears to grasp. Meanwhile, Dr. Rowe's team, now working from a secure facility outside Denver, made another chilling discovery. When the transmission's frequency was slowed down and translated into a visual waveform, it didn't look random at all. It looked like a map. A field of curves and spirals, and at the center, 3 intersecting circles. The pattern looked eerily similar to the real-time positions of ATLAS, Borisov, and Object X. But there was something else. A 4th circle, smaller, unaligned, marked with an oscillating pulse that grew brighter as the days passed. Its coordinates, when plotted, pointed to Earth. That single finding changed everything. Governments held emergency closed-door sessions. NASA issued no statements, but their deep space network went into priority override, dedicating full resources to tracking the alignment. Meanwhile, encrypted military satellites began scanning Earth's upper atmosphere for unusual ionization patterns. The public wasn't told why. But those monitoring global power systems noticed sudden surges, tiny rhythmic fluctuations synchronized with the same repeating 4.9 MHz pulse. Whatever the signal was, it was now inside our electromagnetic field. Dr. Rowe described it best during her final interview before going dark. They're not just reaching out. They're preparing a connection. And as the world held its breath, a few radio astronomers noticed one final anomaly. In the brief gaps between the pulses, deep inside the silence itself, there was a faint sub-frequency hum, almost impossible to detect. But when isolated, amplified, and converted to audio, it produced something no one expected. A human-like tone. Not speech. Not a word. Just breathing. 3 deep inhales. 1 long exhale. As if something, or someone, was waiting. The alignment was nearing completion. The signal was intensifying. And every telescope pointed at Jupiter's orbit could see it now. A faint line of glowing light connecting the 3 objects like a filament stretching through the void. It wasn't just light. It was power. A network had formed. And whatever message it was sending, we were already inside it. For weeks, the patterns between 3I/Atlas and Borisov had felt almost deliberate, as if the 2 travelers were not separate at all, but connected by some invisible thread. Astronomers ran new simulations, feeding every coordinate, every speed reading, every glint of reflected sunlight into their models. What they saw next shook even the most skeptical minds. The 2 interstellar objects weren't just passing through the same region. Their trajectories were synchronized, a mirror movement, like dancers in a slow, silent performance across the solar system. When Atlas adjusted its angle near Jupiter's orbit, Borisov responded, changing its course by the same degree. It wasn't random. It was relational, like one was guiding the other or responding to a shared command. For scientists, that idea was impossible. There's no mechanism that could link 2 objects millions of miles apart. No known force could make them communicate or coordinate. Yet the data didn't lie. Each time one object changed, the other followed. It was as if they were part of the same mission, 2 pieces of one celestial puzzle. In astronomy labs around the world, discussions turned uneasy. Teams from NASA, the European Space Agency, and Japan's JAXA compared results quietly through private channels. Nobody wanted to go public yet, not until they could explain what was happening. But leaked internal memos told another story. One document, dated December 2025, used the phrase coordinated motion. Another described an unexplained symmetry in acceleration. Those words don't belong in a report about random comets. They belong in something far more controlled. Meanwhile, radio observatories began to notice something stranger. The faint rhythmic pulses that once came from 3I/Atlas were now echoed, perfectly, by Borisov. 2 signals, 2 senders, transmitting the same sequence at identical intervals. Sometimes the timing would shift, as if one was testing the other like two musicians tuning before a performance. These were not simple electromagnetic bursts. They carried modulation, coded variation that suggested information. It wasn't clear if it was data, or something beyond our ability to decode. But it was there, repeating night after night, across multiple frequencies. Some independent astronomers tried to broadcast responses, sending carefully timed pulses back toward the coordinates. They expected nothing, of course. Space is too vast and delay times are enormous. But one night, a station in Arizona picked up a return pattern, a faint mirror of their transmission, slightly delayed but unmistakably patterned. The scientists who saw it went quiet for days. They didn't post their results. They didn't speak to the press. They simply shut down their feed and left it running silently, as if afraid to disturb something listening back. In the public sphere, most of this remained invisible. News networks spoke only of 2 interstellar visitors and a rare astronomical event. But behind the calm headlines, the tension grew. Astronomers began comparing old archives, records of 2I/Borisov's original path years earlier. And that's when another anomaly appeared. The new Borisov's orbital parameters matched the final projected trajectory of the original 2I/Borisov, almost as if it had returned, guided by something or someone. It wasn't the same object, composition readings proved that, but it seemed to be retracing the same route as though following a map only it could see. One researcher described it privately as a relay system. In her theory, these interstellar objects weren't random, they were stages in a larger process like breadcrumbs left across the galaxy. Each one carried fragments of data, transferring them between gravitational wells, planets, stars and magnetic fields, to complete an unseen network. If that's true, she wrote, then our solar system isn't just being visited. It's being scanned. By early 2026, the orbits of ATLAS and Borisov placed them in near-perfect alignment with Earth and Jupiter. A line could be drawn between all 3, one that intersected our planet's magnetic axis. That kind of alignment happens only once every tens of millions of years. Yet here it was, forming slowly, steadily, as if by intention. Observatories noticed an increase in magnetic noise, slight fluctuations in Earth's ionosphere, and low-frequency hums captured by deep space antennas. They weren't dangerous, not yet, but they were consistent, rhythmic, and eerily synchronized with both objects' positions. Online communities began calling it the bridge. Conspiracy forums, amateur astronomers, and even mainstream science pages speculated that ATLAS and Borisov might be forming a kind of cosmic gateway, an energy bridge using magnetic resonance to transmit or receive something. Some said it was communication. Others said it was preparation. Inside NASA, however, a quiet urgency took hold. Teams were instructed to double their deep space scans, cross-check satellite data, and monitor for gravitational anomalies. The official reason was research coordination. The real reason was fear. Because if 2 interstellar objects could act together, there might be more. A handful of senior scientists began to whisper about a larger pattern. Something spanning decades, maybe centuries. Every few generations, the solar system receives visitors like these. Oumuamua in 2017, Borisov in 2019, ATLAS in 2025. Each one behaving a little less like a rock and a little more like a machine. Each one arriving closer to the inner planets. Now, as March 2026 approaches, both ATLAS and Borisov drift closer to the same invisible boundary, the region near Jupiter where magnetic storms churn with unimaginable energy. If they meet there, something might happen. A release, a signal, a connection, or maybe nothing at all. But the timing feels deliberate. 2 travelers synchronized. 2 lights tracing an invisible message across the dark. Maybe coincidence has limits. Maybe the universe doesn't just roll dice. Maybe it writes. And if that's true, then whatever story is being written out there in the cold beyond the planets, we're about to read the next line. By March 14, 2026, the world wasn't being told the truth. Governments, research agencies, and military networks had switched into what insiders later called the Silence Protocol. Every communication about 3I/ATLAS, Borisov, and Object X was locked behind encryption firewalls. Astronomers who once spoke freely online suddenly vanished from public view. Independent observatories received temporary cooperation notices. Legal documents that basically meant stop talking or we stop funding. It was the biggest coordinated blackout since the Cold War. And yet, outside that silence, the sky was louder than ever. In quiet suburbs and wide rural stretches of America, people began noticing strange changes. Long exposure photographs of the night sky showed faint, curved trails, thin arcs of bluish light bending between Jupiter and its moons. Satellite networks recorded irregular flickers. Even regular stargazers could tell, the stars didn't look still anymore. They pulsed. Dr. Elena Rowe, now operating under heavy surveillance, tried to alert her colleagues through coded social media posts. One message read, "If silence is protection, then who are we protecting, ourselves or them?" It was deleted within an hour. Behind closed doors, world leaders were briefed on 3 primary risks. First, electromagnetic contamination. The signal was subtly interfering with radio navigation systems, military frequencies, and satellite timing. Second, gravitational instability. NASA's tracking models showed Jupiter's magnetic field slightly fluctuating, as if something massive was influencing it from within. And third, the psychological risk, growing public paranoia. By mid-March, online communities had exploded with theories. Some claimed the objects were alien communication relays. Others swore they were remnants of an ancient interstellar civilization. Conspiracy forums even connected them to biblical prophecies about 3 heralds in the sky. The silence protocol's first rule was to suppress panic. But its second rule was even more disturbing: prepare for contact. Inside a classified joint facility under NORAD command, a group of top scientists, linguists, and military analysts were assembled. Their mission wasn't to decode the signal anymore, it was to respond to it. They called their working plan Project Mirror. The idea was simple, at least in theory. If the transmission was consistent and structured, it could be reflected, duplicated back using the same harmonic frequency, effectively creating a communication loop. But to do that, Earth would need to use every high-power transmitter it had, from HARP in Alaska to deep space antennas across California, Spain, and Australia. It would be the first deliberate attempt to answer something that might not be human. The operation was scheduled for March 16, to coincide with the predicted moment when ATLAS would pass through Jupiter's magnetic field. The same day the cosmic alignment was expected to peak. But not everyone agreed it was a good idea. At the European Southern Observatory, Dr. Marcus Lenz warned that reflecting the signal could trigger a resonance loop, an energy buildup between the 3 objects and Earth's ionosphere. He compared it to plucking a string that connects worlds. Once the vibration starts, no one can stop it. His warnings were ignored. That night, power grids across several U.S. states flickered. Not from overload but synchronization. The national frequency, the pulse of alternating current that keeps electricity balanced, began to oscillate exactly in time with the 4.9 MHz hum detected from space. Power engineers couldn't explain it. Physicists called it impossible. But the timing matched perfectly. Meanwhile, in Moscow, a separate transmission was already underway. Using an old planetary radar array, Russian scientists had decided to send their own signal first. A short burst encoded with mathematical constants and atomic signatures of hydrogen and carbon. Their message took 43 minutes to travel. The reply came in 17 seconds. No one knows what the response said or if it was even language. But within minutes, the Russian network went offline. All data was confiscated. The world didn't even know it happened until leaked internal logs appeared weeks later. By dawn on March 15, fear had reached even those who once laughed at alien talk. People were seeing lights move in the sky that didn't match any known satellite path. Air Force radars picked up invisible objects darting through the upper atmosphere at impossible speeds. And in a quiet command center in Colorado, the silence protocol expanded. Internet throttling began. Amateur radio channels were restricted. Observatories were remotely shut down for maintenance. It was no longer about public panic. It was about control. Dr. Rowe was one of the last civilian scientists still monitoring the alignment in real time. Late that evening, she sent a voice memo to her private archive. The frequency isn't just increasing, it's stabilizing. Like it's waiting for something. Like we're part of a sequence that's about to complete. Her words trembled. Outside, the auroras began. Green and violet curtains danced across skies as far south as Texas, rippling in strange, symmetrical patterns. Magnetic interference caused compass needles to spin. Birds flew in confused spirals, guided by instincts they couldn't trust anymore. The world was quiet, but the air itself felt electric. Every government, every agency, every ordinary person who could feel something shifting in their bones knew it. Something was coming. The silence protocol couldn't stop it now. And as the final hours before the alignment ticked away, humanity stood suspended between wonder and dread, staring at a sky that suddenly felt alive. By the first week of March 2026, the echoes had stopped being just data on a screen. They had become something you could feel. It began quietly, radar systems flickering, GPS satellites losing sync for a fraction of a second, deep space antennas picking up ghost signals that shouldn't exist. At first, no one linked it to ATLAS or Borisov. Engineers blamed solar weather, routine ionospheric disruptions, or minor calibration errors. But the timing told another story. Every interference spike matched perfectly with the echo bursts from deep space, like the universe itself was tapping Earth on the shoulder. The interference grew stranger. Radio operators in Alaska reported short moments of static silence, total dropouts in frequency bands that had been clear for decades. Airline communications near the equator began experiencing faint background hums that technicians couldn't trace. Even ham radio enthusiasts noticed strange rhythmic distortions, faint pulses embedded in their transmissions. People started comparing notes online. Within days, a global pattern appeared, the same pulse, the same rhythm repeating across the planet. Governments didn't make any public comment. But in private, every major observatory began operating under new protocols. Instruments were shielded. Logs were encrypted. Data timestamps were locked under restricted access. Someone, somewhere knew that this interference wasn't random, it was connected. Then, on the night of March 3rd, something extraordinary happened. At the Arecibo Replacement Array in Puerto Rico, a deep space research team detected a sudden surge of energy across multiple bands, low frequency, mid, and microwave all spiking at once. For exactly 47 seconds, their instruments froze. When the systems came back online, the data graphs were blank, except for one word generated automatically by the monitoring software: interference. No numeric values, no noise, just that single word repeated across every channel. The technicians swore the system wasn't programmed to do that. Hours later, similar outages were reported in Chile, Hawaii, and South Africa, the three corners of Earth's deep space observation network. It was as if something vast had passed through the planet, a ripple of invisible energy washing across every receiver. And when the data was compared afterward, one terrifying truth emerged. The energy spike had struck each station in perfect sequence, spaced exactly 3 minutes and 14 seconds apart. The pi signal again. The same pattern that had linked ATLAS and Borisov. Dr. Caroline Huxley, now operating completely independently after being quietly blacklisted from official channels, published a short paper online titled Coherence in Cosmic Interference. She argued that what the world was seeing wasn't random interference at all, it was an interference pattern, the kind produced when two signals overlap intentionally to create resonance. In her theory, ATLAS and Borisov weren't just connected to each other, they were using their alignment to create a focused beam directed toward Earth. She called it, a message written in magnetic fields. Her hypothesis was simple and terrifying. If two synchronized interstellar objects could use resonance to project a combined signal, then every electromagnetic system on Earth, from power grids to radio towers, was part of the receiving field. We weren't just observers anymore. We were inside the message. Meanwhile, strange anomalies began appearing on the ground. Compass needles twitched unexpectedly. Smartphone sensors registered bursts of electromagnetic noise strong enough to drain batteries. In some parts of the world, auroras appeared where no auroras should, glowing ribbons of light twisting over the southern United States, Japan, even Spain. The colors didn't match natural patterns. They pulsed in time with the echoes, like Earth's own atmosphere had joined the rhythm. By now, the mainstream media couldn't ignore it. News anchors called it a global magnetic event. The term trended for days. NASA released a brief statement attributing the phenomena to unusual solar-wind interactions. But solar physicists quickly shot that down. There had been no significant flare activity for weeks. Something else was behind it. Dr. Huxley went live on a small podcast that week, her voice calm but urgent. "We are seeing organized interference," she said. "The echoes aren't noise, they're structure. We are part of an experiment or a communication method. Either way, the senders know we're here." Her words sent chills through listeners across the world. The clip went viral, shared across platforms, dissected in forums, debated on late-night radio shows. Was she right? Could two rogue comets really manipulate electromagnetic fields across millions of miles? That same week, something new appeared in the data, a third harmonic. Not just two overlapping frequencies but three. The first matched ATLAS. The second matched Borisov. The third had no known source. It seemed to come from somewhere closer, much closer. Some analysts believed it originated within Earth's own magnetosphere, like an echo bouncing back. Others suggested something unthinkable, that a third object had entered the alignment, invisible to optical detection but active in radio space. The pattern began to stabilize, forming what looked like a standing wave, a repeating interference pattern that could, in theory, carry information. That's when data scientists realized the spacing of the pulses wasn't arbitrary. When plotted on a logarithmic scale, it formed a spiral sequence identical to the Fibonacci ratio, the same spiral that defines the structure of galaxies, nautilus shells, and DNA. Nature's fingerprint repeating again. By mid-March, Earth's atmosphere itself seemed to resonate. High-altitude sensors detected faint electrical oscillations at frequencies matching the deep space signals. Pilots flying over the North Atlantic reported hearing a low hum in their radio headsets, a tone so deep it was almost felt rather than heard. Air traffic control logs confirmed it. The interference wasn't in their systems. It was in the air. And as the days passed, the synchronization only intensified. ATLAS, now nearing Jupiter's magnetic boundary, began to accelerate again. Borisov followed, still maintaining its perfect midpoint alignment between ATLAS and Earth. Whatever force was linking them seemed to grow stronger with every passing hour. To the public, it was just another strange space story. But to the scientists still quietly tracking the signals, it was something else entirely, a countdown. Each interference spike carried a subtle frequency shift, like the ticking of a cosmic clock edging closer to zero. And that clock pointed to one date, March 16, 2026, the day ATLAS would enter Jupiter's magnetosphere. The interference pattern wasn't just a phenomenon. It was a warning, or an invitation. Whatever it was building toward something. Something humanity had never seen before. The final weeks before March 16, 2026, felt like the breath before a storm. Every major observatory on Earth was locked onto two tiny points of light gliding across the black. 3I/ATLAS and Borisov, once faint curiosities, now burned like symbols, their motion perfectly synchronized as they approached the giant planet that had swallowed countless worlds. Jupiter loomed ahead, enormous and silent. Its clouds spun like living marble, its lightning storms flashing brighter than anything seen on Earth. Somewhere inside that chaos waited the answer to everything astronomers had been asking for months. Would these two interstellar travelers collide, merge, disappear, or reveal something no human had ever witnessed before? At the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, computers ran non-stop simulations. Each one ended differently. In some, the objects slipped past Jupiter and vanished into deep space. In others, they spiraled inward, drawn into the planet's endless storms. But in the most unsettling models, they didn't fall apart at all. They aligned, one directly above the other, forming a vertical line that cut through Jupiter's magnetic field like a needle through fabric. The world was watching. Live streams carried grainy telescope feeds to millions of homes. On social media, people shared countdown clocks and amateur footage of the two lights approaching the gas giant. Some viewers said they could already sense it, a faint hum, a kind of electrical pressure in the air as if the atmosphere itself was waiting. Then came the first anomaly. At exactly 3:11 Universal Time Coordinated, the European Space Agency's magnetometer aboard the Juno 2 probe registered a spike, not in radiation but in resonance. The reading didn't behave like natural interference. It pulsed, steady and deliberate, repeating every 47 minutes. That same rhythm had been hidden in Psyche's lost transmission years before. The pattern was back. Across the Pacific, a network of radio telescopes caught a low-frequency vibration echoing between ATLAS and Borisov. It was almost musical, a deep tone rising and falling like the breath of a giant. As the minutes passed, the two signals grew stronger, overlapping until they fused into one continuous wave that rippled outward through the solar system. And then, at 3:27 Universal Time Coordinated, the light changed. Both objects brightened, not in the blinding flash of an explosion, but in a slow, steady bloom. Their glow shifted from white to pale blue, then to a color no one could quite name, something between gold and shadow. Observers reported that the light didn't just shine. It seemed to bend the space around it, warping Jupiter's halo like ripples on water. NASA's live feed cut out seconds later. Officially, it was due to signal interference. But inside the control rooms, silence fell, not confusion but awe. Data continued to record even after the video went dark. Sensors detected a sphere of electromagnetic pressure expanding from the point of contact, spreading hundreds of thousands of miles across Jupiter's magnetosphere. Within that sphere, gravity itself appeared to fluctuate, as though something massive yet invisible had emerged. For 26 minutes, the world waited in darkness. Then just as suddenly as it began, the interference cleared. The two interstellar objects were gone. In their place, A single bright point shimmered above Jupiter's north pole, motionless, steady, and impossibly stable within the raging magnetic storm. The point stayed there for 9 hours. During that time, faint rhythmic pulses swept through Earth's ionosphere, echoing in the same 47-minute pattern. Satellite operators noticed tiny shifts in orbit paths, so subtle they were almost unmeasurable, yet synchronized perfectly with the pulses. Some described it as a gentle tug, like the planet itself was breathing in rhythm with something far away. Then, just before dawn on the east coast of the United States, the light over Jupiter dimmed. It didn't fade out, it folded inward as if it were being pulled into another dimension. When the last trace vanished, every magnetometer on Earth spiked for one brief, silent second. And then, nothing. No explosion, no debris, no signal. Just calm. The official explanation came quickly: a plasma discharge event within Jupiter's upper atmosphere. But behind closed doors, scientists disagreed. There was no evidence of discharge. No heat, no ion trails, no fragments. It was as if the objects had never existed at all. Still, some data refused to disappear. The spectral readings from that night contained new, unknown elements, frequencies that didn't match any natural emission line. And buried in those frequencies, analysts found something stranger: a sequence of numbers. Not random but organized, a repeating series that translated, when plotted, into a perfect geometric pattern. The same pattern both objects had traced through the solar system. It wasn't a message anyone could read, but it was a design, deliberate, mathematical, and ancient in its simplicity. Over the following weeks, the public's attention drifted elsewhere. News cycles moved on. But in observatories and deep space monitoring stations, a quiet unease remained. Every so often, the same faint tone reappeared, that slow, pulsing hum. Though this time it came from behind Jupiter, from a region no satellite could see. Some believe ATLAS and Borisov fused into something new, a single entity using Jupiter's magnetic storms as a shield or a power source. Others think they opened a passage, a resonance window that briefly connected our system to somewhere else entirely. No one can prove either theory. But late in April 2026, a probe on the far side of the Moon detected an incoming signal, faint, rhythmic, and unmistakably similar. The coordinates pointed not toward Jupiter, but back toward Earth. Maybe it's just noise. Maybe it's reflection. Or maybe whatever began out there hasn't ended at all. Because sometimes the universe doesn't speak in words or pictures. It speaks in timing, in the quiet harmony between stars, in the unexplainable symmetry of motion. And when patterns align as perfectly as this, it makes you wonder, are we being observed or invited? So keep watching the sky. Because the next light we see may not be a comet, but a reply.